Hello everyone, welcome to my September favourites. Strap yourselves in, it's gonna be a long one. Just had to fix the frame, sorry. Alright, to begin with, I've got one TV show and that is Heartstopper Season 2. I don't know if it came out this month or if it came out the month before, but I watched it in August. Did I say September favourites? It's my August favourites. And I watched the first season, I think when it first came out, whenever it first came out, and I really enjoyed it, and I was very much looking forward to the second season. And it's just such a warm show, like it's so wholesome and it just makes you feel warm inside. There's not like, nothing's too dramatic or sad or serious. Like, don't get me wrong, it covers really interesting topics and important topics, but you can just watch it and like love it. And it's really beautiful. And I loved Isaac's storyline. Is his name Isaac? I think so. It was just, yes, top notch. And now onto books. I've just looked at the number here, I can't quite believe this. I read 15 books this month. That's about one every 2 days, which is accurate to be fair. I was flying through them, but I'm a bit in shock. So strap yourself in for lots of book reviews. The first book I read this month was a non-fiction book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Laurie Gottlieb? I don't know, sorry. And this book was recommended, I think, either by Hannah Witten or by someone, a book YouTuber anyway. And I've heard about it a few times from a few different people. And it's about, like, it's a therapist who writes, but it's about her experiences being a therapist, but then also with her own therapy. And I was a bit hesitant to read this book. I don't really know why, but I just was. But I loved it. I think it's so well written. It doesn't feel like you're reading a non-fiction. It feels like you're reading a novel, which I enjoy. I like that. And yet I just think it was so interesting. The one thing I think that was a bit of a shame about this one was that it didn't make me feel necessarily like you need to go to therapy. Whereas I think that is what the message was trying to be. So that's a shame. But aside from that, loved this book. Very, very good. Then I read another non-fiction called Contemporary Left Antisemitism by David Hirsch. As you might know, I am Jewish and I don't really know how I feel about Israel. And I've really been trying to sort of read more and find out more information so I can form my own opinions. And with this book, I just felt it didn't really help me. And I don't know, you know, I've had a really Jewish upbringing, so I've always I've known a lot about the things he's talking about. And even though luckily I've never really felt anti-Semitism, I'm very aware of it. So I felt like I wasn't really learning very much, and also this was quite a dry book. It was very factual. It was like the total opposite of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And it just felt like I was reading one long essay. And I felt like points were being repeated. I felt like it could have been a lot shorter and more condensed. So I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it necessarily. Next, I read a fiction book called You'd Be Home Now by Kathleen Glasgow. And this one, I had to go into it with the mindset of this is a young adult fiction. If I was going into it as an adult book, I don't think I would have enjoyed it, but knowing that it was more, I think anyway, it was aimed for young adults, I thought it was brilliant. I think it's something that young adults should read. I would like to see it on like the bookshelves of school libraries. It did cover topics of, you know, drug abuse and just things along those lines. So, you know, read with caution, but I do think it's worth reading. Then I read a duology by Amy Rose Capetta and Cori McCarthy. The first book is Once and Future, and then the sequel is Sword in the Stars. And this just made me happy. It was a retelling of King Arthur, I believe, but it was set in the future. And basically the premise of it is that there's different reincarnations of King Arthur. And the latest reincarnation is like set in the future where they're living in space and it's a girl, I think a teen girl. That's the first book. And then the second book is they travel back in time to when the first King Arthur happened, and they're just trying to sort things out. I thought it was really clever. It was a little bit childish, I would say, again, young adult probably, but I loved the concept. I thought it was really well built. The world was really well built. I thought it was clever. I don't know the original King Arthur story very well. Obviously I know like bits of it, but I'm not super familiar with it. But even despite that, I really enjoyed it. It was a great duology. Then, this is a maybe. This is the only maybe of my books. The Icarus Deception by Seth Godin. This was another non-fiction, and this one I really struggled with. This one felt very, very dry. I didn't feel like much of it sunk in at all. And to be fair, like at this point, this is the 6th book I'd read in a month, in a few weeks, in a few days probably. So, you know, there's that to consider as well. But again, I just really struggled with this one, and I felt like it could have been condensed by a lot. But it wasn't bad, it wasn't bad. But it definitely wasn't my absolute favourite. Next I read The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini? I don't know. This book. I read, what's it called? 1,000 Splendid Suns or something like that last year. Or earlier in the year. I think it was when I was in Australia. And that like really touched me. It was just gorgeous and heartbreaking. And this was the same. And when I read that book earlier in the year, I messaged one of my friends to say, oh, I'm reading this book and it's horrible, but like in a good way. And they wrote back and said, oh, isn't that the same author as The Kite Runner? And I said, oh, I've never really heard of The Kite Runner. And they wrote back and said, it's a brilliant book, you need to read it. So I had it on my waiting list up until now, and I finally got around to reading it. All of these were audiobooks, by the way. And it was just, wow. It was heartbreaking and beautiful, and just gave you a glimpse as well, like into this world that we know so little about as, you know, Westerners. And it was beautiful. So yeah, that was another really top tier book. Next I read Cinder and Glass by Melissa de la Cruz. And this was another one I really struggled with. And I feel really bad because I think it was a good book. I enjoyed what it was. It was obviously quite childish because again, it's a retelling of Cinderella, and it's going to be hard not to make that childish and predictable, which it was, but I still really enjoyed it. But what I really struggled with on this one was the narrator. From the moment it started, I just didn't enjoy the style. It was so overdramatic. And like every sentence was overdramatic. Oh my goodness, my water bottle is full. And oh my goodness, the stepsisters are being so mean to me. But she's really lovely. But oh my goodness, it was like, make it stop. Make it stop. Just read the book. Not everything needs to be so dramatic. It was just painful, genuinely painful to listen to the narrator. But the book itself was good. Again, if you see it as like a young adult fiction. A young adult. And if you don't mind that it's going to be predictable because it's the story of Cinderella. And I think especially at the end, the character, and that is not the narrator, the character was a little bit too dumb. And I think it was in this book as well. I've read so many books, but I'm pretty sure it was in this book. Halfway through, there's like a 1-year gap, like a jump. But she made it, I had to like go back over it a few times because I was like, is it just 1 year? Because she made it seem like all these people were totally unrecognizable. But it's only been a year. Like, I know people grow up, but she made it seem like it was from the age of, 12 to the age of 18, whereas really I think it was from the age of 13 to 14 or something like that. So yeah, that was another one that I did enjoy, but I didn't love. And I think a big part of it was the narrator, which is really unfortunate. But then also a part of it was the writing itself. But I thought it was sweet, and I would recommend it if you're sort of young adult. And if you like retellings of fairy tales, which I do. This is gonna be such a long video. Next, I read You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. This has also been in my to read list for a while, and I've been waiting for it to become available. I read Book Lovers by the same author last month, and I loved Book Lovers. But I actually had initially put this one on my reading list, but because it wasn't available and then it came up with Book Lovers, I thought, yeah, let's do that. This book was very different to what I was expecting, but it was very nice. It was just another heartwarming, easy read, light, sweet, and it just made me happy and warm and summery. And I think I've decided I like Emily Henry's writing style. I think I preferred Book Lovers over this one, but that's just because I liked the setting of books. And I think I liked the characters a little bit more in Book Lovers. But this one was also, it was just a warm story. And I would personally argue it was quite predictable, but maybe not everyone will agree with that. But I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a light, breezy read. Next, I finally decided to reread, because I thought I wasn't going to do any rereads this month or this year, but I was like, do you know what? I fancy rereading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. Actually, the truth is I wanted to reread Alice by heart, but I felt like I should reread the original story first. So I did, and I listened to this one with the narrator being, I think, Christopher Plummer, and I really enjoyed it. I loved it, obviously. It's a classic and I've always loved it. I love Alice in Wonderland, and I love I would love to play Alice one day in sort of any adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. So, you know, how can you not love it? But the audio really annoyed me on this because it was not balanced. It didn't feel balanced. And on the whole, it was too quiet. Even when it was on full volume, even when it was in my earphones, it wasn't loud enough. And I don't need my books to be very loud. I'm not, you know, even remotely deaf, but it was just, there was something really weird with the audio. And then there were moments that would be really loud, or at least maybe they were normal volume, but because I'd put everything up to its fullest, it just felt really loud. And I didn't love all the choices made with the, like, accents and voices. But it was very impressive how Christopher Plummer was able to go from one to the other very quickly. So that's my review on that one. And then I did in fact reread Alice by Heart by Stephen Slater. Wow, that didn't want to come out. Stephen Slater. I read this book, I think in lockdown, I believe, after I'd found out about the musical, I think, or was it the other way around? I can't remember. But when I read it, I remember really struggling to retain a lot of what it was saying, of what the book was. So I wanted to give it another go, and I really focused in on it and tried to pay more attention, and I loved it. I think I did love it when I first read it as well, but I just thought it was so heartbreaking and so good, and a clever adaptation, and sad but beautiful. Yeah, I'm a big fan. It was a little bit messy at times, it was just a little bit confusing, but on the whole, yeah, I loved it. Then I read another young adult fiction called Kate in Waiting by Becky Albertalli. I'm so sorry about my pronunciations, everyone. This was another young adult fiction, but I did enjoy it. I put it in my reading list because it was a book to do with theatre. I like theatre. And again, it felt very predictable to me. Very predictable. Maybe not to everyone, and maybe again, because I'm a bit outside of the demographic, maybe it didn't work as well for me. I think it would be a brilliant read if I was, you know, maybe 10 to 5 years younger. I think I would have loved this when I was in school, and I still really enjoyed it, and I would really recommend it to, you know, anyone really, but especially to teenagers, especially if you like theatre. But again, it was just a really light, easy read. 3 more to go. The next book I read was Safe With Me by K.L. Slater. I didn't realise K.L. Slater is a really big author. I just liked the premise of this book, and that's why I wanted to read it. And again, I really struggled with this book. I did love it, but I hated the narrator. And by this I mean not the actual narrator, I meant the character. The narrator was fine, was good, but it's written in first person, and it's written in different perspectives. But whenever it came back to the main character, it was a really tough read, because it was so narcissistic and so, she was so up herself and so confident in all these things she was saying, even though they were totally wrong. Any outsider could see they were wrong. And I found that really hard to read. And it was, again, predictable, in my opinion. Or at least a little bit predictable. And there was this one thing that was really building up to something big, and then it kind of felt like it deadpanned a little bit. I don't know. It was building up to something that could have been really exciting, and it just didn't feel that exciting when it got to the main bit. And that was frustrating. But I did enjoy this book. I think it was very clever. Next, this one I'm really excited about. I read Ghosted by Sarah Reddy. And this was an advanced reader's copy, or whatever it's called. I discovered, after I read Safe With Me, I went to the reviews on Storygraph, and I read some of them where they said they'd got an advanced copy. And I was like, how did you do that? And it turns out there's this platform called NetGalley where you can get advanced copies of books, either ebooks or audiobooks, in exchange for an honest review. So there is going to be a full review going up, but that won't be till December. So I'm just going to quickly talk about it here as well. And I will link NetGalley down below. I genuinely loved this book. It asks for honest review, so I could tell you if it was rubbish. But I loved this book. First of all, the cover is just gorgeous. But second of all, it was just such a sweet, clever premise, and not really something I've come across before in my reading. Basically, this girl moves into an apartment in New York and discovers there's someone already there, and then it turns out that someone is a ghost. And then the story evolves from there. And it was clever, there were some twists and turns. The very ending was predictable, but I think everything else was really keeping you on your toes. And it was just sweet, it just made you so warm inside. It was a lovely, lovely read. I would probably class this one a bit more as adult fiction, although maybe like late young adult. But yeah, I loved this book. It made me very happy. And as I said, there will be a full review going up in a few months. And finally, my last book of the month was The Woman They Could Not Silence by Kate Moore. This is a non-fiction, and my goodness, is this a brilliant non-fiction. Again, I'd heard a lot of really good things about it just through YouTube and things. And it's about this woman from 160 years ago who basically single-handedly changed a lot of laws to do with women's rights in the late 1800s. She was sent to a mental asylum by her husband and stayed there for, I think, 9 years or something. And even though she wasn't insane, it was just because she disagreed with his views on something. And it was just a really inspiring story. It was a kind of story where you think, why have I not been taught about this before? It was heartbreaking and so like reflective of society, even nowadays, which is very unfortunate. And I so highly recommend this book. And again, it was the kind of non-fiction that doesn't feel like a non-fiction, it just felt like a novel. It didn't even feel like it could be real. And then it hurts you when you know that it is real. And it really happened. But I think it was so well researched, it was so well written. The one thing I struggled with, but then halfway through I kind of changed my mind about this, was that very often the author, Kate Moore, was obviously using direct quotes, but so halfway through a sentence it would go from, she said, I think blah blah blah. And it would just like change which like perspective they were talking from, like mid-sentence. But that was in the first half, and then it got to the second half and I was like, actually in a way it's nice because this is an audiobook, so I can't see where the quotation marks come in. I don't know what is factually like said and what is Kate Moore's, you know, interpretation. So having that flip kind of made it obvious what were direct quotes and primary sources. So yeah, that's up to you. But I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. I think I will at the end of the year do a full ranking of like my non-fiction books of the year. Just so if you're looking at delving into non-fiction, you know where to start. But we'll have to do that at the end of the year. Alright, that's the end of my books. We're 25 minutes into this video and I've still got a bit more to go. So quickly, I had one musical and that is Alice by Heart. I managed to find some clips on YouTube and watch bits of it because I'd never actually watched any of it. I just listened to the music. So it's nice to see some visual, I don't know, some visuals of it. And it looks like it was really beautifully done. Like I loved the bits of physical theatre I could see. Then for music, I've got two. I've got the new Fall Out Boy album, which I promised my friend I was going to listen to like months ago when it first came out, and I just never did. And I finally did, and I did enjoy it. Fall Out Boy isn't necessarily for me, but it's growing on me. And then the second one, oh, there's three actually. The second one is Kinderen voor Kinderen 25 jaar, which Kinderen voor Kinderen is a program in Holland that is kids singing songs aimed for other kids, and we used to watch it every year, used to love it. And we had the 25-year like version on DVD and I used to watch it over and over and over again, and recently I found it on Spotify. Not the videos obviously, but the songs, and so I started listening to them again and it brought back a lot of memories, and I do still like some of the songs. And finally, you're gonna sigh, it's Katri. I've mentioned them before many a time on my channel. It's the band I used to love as a kid and have started to love again. Well, I never stopped loving, but I've relit the fire. Okay, two to go. Fashion, I've got one. I've got a black dress I got from my cousin. Let me grab it for you. This is what it looks like. It's beautiful. I love it. And I've worn it a couple of times this month. And last but not least is an app. It's the Hill Climb Racing app, which I have had for years and this month got back into playing. Now, my song of the month, I really struggled with this for this month, but I ended up going with Down the Hall from Alice by Heart because it's kind of been in my head. But I've just been listening to like a wide variety of music this month, and also equally not very much music because I've been listening to so many books. So that's kind of like a half-hearted option for my song of the month. Those are my September favourites. Thank you so much for sticking around if you did stick around this long. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know your favourites down below. Let me know if you've got any book recommendations. As I said, thank you to NetGalley for Ghosted, and I will link them down below as well. And I will link my book review up here or here, wherever it is, but it won't be available until December. Thank you all so much, and I will see you very shortly in the next video. Bye!